I was 32 the night I realized my life had been rehearsed for someone else's performance. I was raised in a household where ambition was air and duty was dessert. My name is Emma Whitmore, and I'd spent most of my adult life assuming that the countless sacrifices I made missed holidays 2 a.m. Deadlines, silence in the face of condescension were building towards something solid, something promised. But what I got instead was a toast. It happened at Gibson's Steakhouse on Rush Street, one of those old-money Chicago institutions where the napkins are folded like origami, and the air smells like legacy and expectation. My parents, Robert and Catherine Whitmore, sat across from me, both dressed like this was a retirement gala. The kind of outfit that says, "This matters more than we're admitting." My younger sister, Madison, strolled in 10 minutes late, scarf flung over her shoulder cheeks, flushed like she'd just come from some charity wine tasting. Her latte still steamed in her hand. That alone should have tipped me off. No one carries coffee into a steakhouse unless they're either clueless or already know the script. I had spent the entire previous night polishing a 3-year expansion roadmap. Forecasts, org charts, market penetration angles, all printed on heavy ivory stock and slipped into a leather folder that sat like a brick beside my chair. In my purse, I kept my brass office key, something my father had given me when I was 29, with the words, "This isn't just a key, Emma. It's trust." That night, it felt heavier than ever, like it knew something I didn't. The small talk was excruciating. My mom complimented my blazer navy structured classic. My dad asked Madison about her latest networking brunch. Nobody mentioned the word promotion, but it hung there heavy and sweet, like the wine they ordered before the entrees arrived. Then, after the steaks hit the table, my father cleared his throat. "As you both know," he said, his voice as smooth as the scotch he was nursing your mother, "and I have been thinking seriously about the future of Whitmore Strategies." He paused, not for drama, but because he believed in cadence. He always said timing was the difference between authority and arrogance. "We're not getting any younger," Mom chimed in, brushing a crumb off her napkin, "and it's time to step back slowly, thoughtfully." I sat up straighter. This was it, finally. My heart raced as my dad raised his glass. "To the next chapter and to our new chief executive officer." He looked past me, to Madison. The clinking of crystal was immediate. My mother's smile was so wide it looked painful. Madison blinked feigned surprise, like an amateur actress caught off guard. But her eyes, they already knew. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her glass, not from shock, but from the sheer weight of the charade. My fork remained midair. I felt the metal grow colder in my hand as my brain tried to make sense of the words, still ringing in the air like an off-key bell. I forced a smile. The kind you give when someone steps on your foot and then thanks you for being in the way. To Madison, I said, my voice barely rising above a whisper. It caught in my throat like a stone. They didn't see it, not really. The way I sat there smiling as the floor gave way beneath me. They didn't see my heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear the server asking how I wanted my dessert. I nodded at something, I think. Or maybe I laughed at a joke I didn't hear. Because that's what women like me do. When we're blindsided, we hold the line. We keep it tidy. After dinner, Madison hugged me, murmured, "I didn't know how to tell you. I just found out a few days ago." I looked at her face, searching for some sliver of remorse that felt real. There was nervousness, yes, maybe even guilt, but no regret. The decision was made, and she had accepted it. That night when I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled the brass key from my purse. I held it under the lamplight, its edges worn, the teeth dulled from use. This key had unlocked late nights pitch rehearsals, 1,000 6 a.m. client calls. It had once felt like a badge of honor. Now it just felt like a relic. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I planned. And then I did something dangerous. I made a decision. The next morning I requested a meeting. Not with Madison, not with HR, with my parents, just them. The ones who had chosen a smile over a system, a brunch post over a business plan. It was a damp winter day in Chicago, the kind that seeps into your bones no matter how thick your coat is. I wore black slacks, the same navy blazer, and a charcoal sweater, not to impress, but to remind myself who built the place they now wanted to hand off like a party favor. I arrived early. They were already seated, Dad scrolling something on his phone, Mom with her notebook open, like she was prepping for a press interview. I didn't bother with small talk. I sat spine straight. "I need to understand," I said. "What made you choose Madison over me?" They glanced at each other. That corporate nod that means, "You take this one." "Emma, you've been extraordinary," Dad started. "There's no denying your impact. But—" "There it is," I interrupted. "The but? Go on." Mom leaned in, her voice low and syrupy. "Leadership is more than numbers. It's about connection, warmth." My stomach turned. "So I'm cold." "No," she said quickly, "just intense. You focus so hard, you sometimes forget to make space for others." I stared at her, and Madison does. She listens. "People feel seen by her," Dad added. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony was unbearable. I had sacrificed my 20s, poured everything I had into this company, built their entire digital strategy, doubled revenue from real estate clients, ran the Harper pitch like a machine. And now I was being benched because I didn't make the board feel cuddled. "So this isn't about results," I said. "It's about being palatable." "Don't twist this," Mom said gently but firmly. "You're brilliant, Emma, but sometimes your brilliance alienates." There it was, the death knell of every competent woman who didn't sugarcoat, who led with clarity instead of charm. "And you want me to stay?" I asked. "Work under her." The silence was all the answer I needed. I felt the brass key in my coat pocket, pressing against my thigh like it was branding me. I stood. "I won't report to someone who hasn't earned what I built." Dad stood too. "You're being emotional." "No," I said, leveling my gaze. "I'm being honest." I paused, letting the words hang. "I'm resigning." The room froze. I turned to walk out, but not before saying one final thing. "You made a mistake, and I intend to show you just how big it was." Then I left. But before I exited the building, I did one last thing. I went to my office, unlocked the door, stepped inside. I placed the brass key alone on my desk. Then I took a photo of it. Not for memory, for proof. Because what I was about to do next wasn't just quitting. It was a declaration. 3 weeks after I walked out of Whitmore Strategies, I found myself living out of a hotel room in Denver, one of those long-stay places with muted green carpets, scratchy towels, and a kitchenette too small for real cooking. The window overlooked a row of leafless trees and a Walgreens parking lot. But in the distance, the Rockies stood tall and unbothered like they'd seen it all before. Every morning, I'd sit on the worn-out couch, clutching a cup of bitter coffee brewed from a plastic pod, and stare at those mountains, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, or the best decision I'd ever had the guts to follow through on. I had no job title, no paycheck, no safety net. But I had silence, and for the first time in years, I could hear myself think. No back-to-back Zooms, no late-night board memos, no one asking me to soften my tone or wait my turn. Just quiet. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar, liberating quiet. I took out a leather-bound notebook, one I'd meant to use for strategy planning, but never had time to fill, and wrote one word at the top of the first page: build. Denver wasn't random. A year earlier, I'd pitched the city as a prime candidate for Whitmore's expansion booming tech scene, rising creative class, cost-effective workspace. My parents had waved it off with a patronizing, "It's too early, Emma." So now it was mine. The blueprint they ignored would become my starting point. Within 5 days, I found a one-bedroom in the Reno district, exposed brick drafty windows, a heating system that groaned like an old man in the mornings. But it had space, light. It smelled like new beginnings and fresh paint. I bought a futon, a collapsible desk, and one folding chair from Facebook Marketplace. That was it. I wasn't decorating, I was constructing. I filed the LLC paperwork that same week. I named it Summit Marketing Solutions, a nod to the skyline outside my window, but also to something deeper. My own summit, my own climb. I funded it from the savings I'd quietly accumulated for years, money that once had a wedding or a down payment tied to it. Now it was seed capital. I built the website myself. Bare bones, no fluff, just results and real language. I chose a deep blue color scheme not for aesthetics, but because it felt grounded, trustworthy, serious. Then I reached into my personal CRM, the one I'd built in secret, a quiet insurance policy, against the day Whitmore would forget where its edge came from. And I started making calls, not pitching, not pleading, just, "Hey, it's Emma. I'm consulting now. Let me know if you ever need strategy." The first person to call back was Patricia. She ran marketing for a mid-sized tech firm in Chicago, one I had personally onboarded 2 years ago. before Madison even knew what a revenue funnel was. "I heard you left," she said without preamble. "Their loss. Want to grab coffee?" She happened to be in Boulder that week. We met at a cafe with mismatched chairs and cracked tile floors. She slid a folder across the table, like it was a file in a covert operation. "This is our current pipeline. It's a mess. We need someone who tells the truth." That word hit me like a jolt of espresso. Truth. It was all I ever tried to offer at Whitmore. But their truth was only valued if it came with a smile and a softened edge. Here in Denver, it felt like a currency. Over the next month and a half, I worked out of my tiny apartment like a woman possessed. Patricia's company became my first transformation case: data segmentation, CRM, rework, copy overhaul. By the time we wrapped, she brought in her COO. "You've done more in 6 weeks than our last agency did in a year," she said. I didn't say thank you. I said, "Want to keep going?" She said yes. That night, I sat at my desk, stared out the window, and let it sink in. I never needed Whitmore strategies to succeed. They needed me. By month 3, I had 4 steady clients, all through referrals. My inbox was full of words like, "Urgent strategic guidance. Do you have capacity?" I moved out of the apartment and into a co-working space, just a single private room with 2 chairs, 1 window, and a cabinet. In that cabinet, I placed the brass office key. I didn't hang it on the wall. I didn't frame it. I tucked it into a drawer between my pens and a bottle of ibuprofen. Not as a wound, as a reminder. Then one afternoon, the front desk buzzed. "Hey, Emma," the receptionist said, "you've got someone named Jessica here. She says she used to work with you in Chicago." My heart skipped. Jessica had been my assistant back at Whitmore, the only person who saw the late nights, the backdoor politics, the ghost edits on my decks. I'd left too fast to say goodbye. She stepped into my office, looking exactly the same: polished blazer, neat bun, a tote bag filled to capacity. But her face was different, less guarded. "Hi," she said, soft but steady. We sat. She didn't waste time. "Madison's trying, but it's not working." I stayed quiet. The Harper pitch bombed. Clients are asking where the dashboards went, where the insights went. They're noticing. Still, I said nothing. She leaned forward. "Are you hiring?" I blinked. "I haven't even thought about employees." "Well," she said, "think about it. Because I'd rather build something real with you than pretend everything's fine over there." That night, I lay awake in my new apartment, staring at the ceiling. Jessica was smart, detail-oriented. She knew the system. She knew me. She was the kind of third piece every builder needs: a mirror, an anchor, a compass. 2 weeks later, she moved to Denver. She took over the chaos operations, onboarding, invoicing, scheduling. I got to focus on strategy, creative growth. Together, we worked like a mind with 2 hands. I remember the day she looked at me and said, "You know, Summit doesn't feel right anymore. It feels safe. Like it's still attached to where you came from." She wasn't wrong. So we renamed it Elevation Marketing. Elevation was bolder, sharper, more exacting. The identity matched the output, helping brands rise above noise through truth-backed strategy. We weren't just an agency. We were a movement. And just when I thought I had gained momentum, just when I finally felt like I had command of my future, Jessica walked in, holding a single piece of paper, her hands shaking slightly. "You're going to want to see this," she said. I turned. It was a contract from Westfield Corporation, a national real estate giant. They were offering $2 million over 3 years for a full marketing overhaul. It was double the Harper deal I had once begged to lead. And this time, no one else's name was on it but mine. But what happened next, who reached out next, would flip everything I thought I'd buried wide open. Because just days after signing Westfield, the one name I'd avoided for months came back into my inbox: Harper Industries. And they weren't just asking for a call, they were asking for me. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind where the sky can't decide between snow or rain, and the wind cuts sideways through your coat like it has something personal against you. I was sipping lukewarm coffee at my desk, reviewing early Q2 projections for Elevation, when Jessica walked in with a strange look on her face. Part excitement, part alarm. She didn't say anything. She just held out her phone like it was radioactive. On the screen, a name I hadn't seen since the night I walked out of that glass conference room in Chicago. Rachel, Harper Industries. I stared at the screen, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and déjà vu. The last time I heard her voice, I was being told I was too emotionally invested to lead a pitch I had spent 2 years cultivating. I had built that relationship from the ground up, brick by brick. While Madison floated through client dinners, talking about abstract leadership and work-life balance, Jessica whispered, "I think you should answer." So I did. "Hi, Rachel, this is Emma." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel like a confession. "Emma." I wasn't sure you'd pick up. "I always pick up for clients," I replied. "Or former ones." Another pause. Then she exhaled. "I'll be direct. We're unhappy. Johnson's campaign didn't hit benchmarks it missed by 40%. The messaging was inconsistent. The analytics were shallow. Honestly, it felt like they didn't understand our vision. And I can't shake the feeling that you were the vision all along." Her words hit hard, not because they were flattering, but because they confirmed what I already knew. They weren't just losing numbers. They were losing faith. "We'd like to talk," she said, "about working with you directly, on our terms, your way." This was the moment in stories where people usually cheer where the underdog gets the phone call and throws a fist in the air. But I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. Because this wasn't just about landing a client. This was about taking back the narrative. "I'll need 48 hours, I said calmly. "Of course." We hung up, and for a moment, I just sat there, staring out the window. The snow had finally started falling. Big, quiet flakes. Jessica sat down across from me, so I turned toward her steady. "We're going to rebuild the entire proposal from scratch." We spent the next 2 days reviewing every note I'd ever made about Harper, every email, every data point, every insight I'd collected before my name was scrubbed from their contact sheet. But I wasn't going to recycle what I'd built at Whitmore. That was their system, their framework. What I brought to Harper now had to be fully mine. I called it the Elevation Framework. A bold, data-backed system rooted in measurable growth, user engagement loops, and behavioral segmentation, but wrapped in storytelling. Strategy with backbone, insight with heart. Jessica looked at the draft and said, "This doesn't just compete with Whitmore. It buries them." That Friday, Rachel and her executive team flew into Denver. We booked a sleek conference room downtown with exposed beams, clean whiteboards, real coffee, and no performative buzzwords taped to the walls. I wore a navy pantsuit and carried a leather folio with one printed proposal inside. Tucked beneath it was the brass office key, not as a weapon, as a witness. I didn't pitch, I invited. I walked them through the framework, explaining not just how we'd hit their numbers, but how we'd make them mean something. I spoke plainly, confidently, without apology. Halfway through the CMO began taking notes in the margins. Near the end, I saw Rachel close her laptop and simply listen. When I finished, she stood slowly. "Well," she said with a knowing smile, "I think we've found our partner." 2 days later, the contract was signed. $1.5 million over 2 years. Full autonomy, clean slate. Jessica and I toasted with 2 mismatched mugs and a bottle of Prosecco we had been saving for someday. That night, we sat in the office long after dark, the city lights flickering against the window. "This," Jessica said, "is what it looks like when the right person finally gets the credit." I nodded but didn't speak, because I knew we weren't done. Not yet. Within the week, the Harper account switch became public. LinkedIn lit up. A quiet ripple turned into a buzz. 2 of Whitmore's existing clients reached out to Elevation. One was diplomatic, the other was blunt. "If you're the one who built that system," she said, "we want you. Not the company that tried to own your name." I didn't respond with flair or ego. I responded with a transition call, clean handoff, and results-driven roadmap. This wasn't about revenge. It was about realignment. Meanwhile, Jessica and I moved Elevation into a larger space. Still modest, but with room to breathe. We brought in another strategist and a junior designer. We hung a brass nameplate by the door. Elevation Marketing Built for Truth. And just when I thought the past had finally gone quiet, Jessica walked into my office holding a FedEx envelope, her face unreadable. "It's from Whitmore," she said carefully. Inside was a typed letter, formal and cold. It was from my father. They wanted to propose a strategic partnership, a lifeline. They were bleeding, and they were finally admitting they needed help. But it wasn't the letter that made my fingers go cold. It was what came next. Because not 2 hours later, my phone lit up. Madison. First call since I'd left. And the subject line of her follow-up email, "Emma, you were right about him." I stared at my phone frozen. Madison's name lit up the screen like a warning flare. But the subject line, "Emma, you were right about him," hit like a crack of thunder in a quiet field. I didn't answer immediately. I just sat there holding the phone like it might detonate. My body remembered too much the glass conference room, the champagne toast, the way she smiled while I shattered. But curiosity has its own gravity. I picked up. Her voice was nothing like I remembered. No false brightness, no calculated ease, just raw panic edged with something softer shame. "Emma," she asked, voice low and strained. "I need to talk. Not about the company, about Dad, about everything." I didn't say anything at first, just let the silence stretch thick with every unsaid thing. "Please," she added, "it's not what you think." 24 hours later, I was sitting in a dimly lit cafe off West Colfax, the kind with chipped mugs and forgotten Christmas lights still hanging in the windows. I wore a black turtleneck and sunglasses, not to hide, but because I needed a layer between myself and whatever storm was coming. She arrived late. Her hair was unbrushed. Her face was bare. She looked like a woman who'd been living on secrets and no sleep. She sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around the ceramic mug. I waited. No sympathy, no rush, just quiet. "I was wrong," she said, finally, voice cracking. "I didn't plan for you to be pushed out, but when it started, I didn't stop it. I thought, if you were gone, maybe I'd finally matter to Dad." There it was. The root of it all, not ambition, not sabotage, just longing. Just the kind of wound no title could fix. "I knew I wasn't ready," she admitted, "but I wanted to be seen as more than the charming daughter. You always got the respect, even when they didn't say it. I got the attention, but not the weight. You carried the company. I wore the face." I stayed quiet, but my chest felt tight. Not from rage, from grief. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photo, faded edges curled. Us, maybe 15 and 17, sitting on the floor of the old office sketching fake logos for a business we swore we'd start one day. I remembered that moment. The smell of the carpet cleaner, the highlighters, the way we argued over font sizes like it meant life or death. "I found this in Dad's desk last week," she said. It was under a list. A list of things he'd never say. She handed it to me. It was typed, bullet-pointed, folded twice. One line made my breath catch. "Emma sees people. Madison sees expectations. That's on me." Madison wiped her eyes, barely holding herself together. "I stepped down 2 days ago," she whispered, "from Whitmore. I told the board they needed to evolve or die. And I told them if they wanted a real future, they should look into elevation." I blinked, stunned. She wasn't here for manipulation. She was here because she'd finally seen the scaffolding fall. "I don't want the title," she said. "I want to build again, like we used to before all this." Then she pulled one last thing from her coat. A brass key. It looked almost identical to mine. Same weight, same teeth, but newer, shinier, still clean. "I had this made when they named me CEO," she said. "It was supposed to symbolize me stepping into your shoes. I thought I'd finally earned something." She placed it on the table beside my coffee. "But now I think it should symbolize something else." I looked at the 2 keys, hers bright, mine worn, and suddenly the difference wasn't just physical. It was everything. Hers was the idea of leadership. Mine was its cost. We didn't say much after that. Just sat with the weight of 1,000 broken assumptions between us. For the first time in years, I saw her not the projection, not the rival, but the kid sister who used to beg to stay up late and sneak marshmallows into the cereal box. Later that evening, back at the office, I opened my drawer and took out my original brass key. I placed Madison's next to it, not as a gesture of forgiveness, as a reminder of what legacy looks like before and after it's earned. Jessica walked in just then, laptop in hand. Her expression told me everything. "You're going to want to see this." She turned the screen toward me. It was a press release. "Johnson Marketing merges with Harper Industries under new leadership directive." I blinked. But it wasn't the merger that stunned me. It was the name listed beneath the headline, Strategic Director, Emma Whitmore. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even taken a meeting, but they were already using my name. And that meant the final battle hadn't even started. I stared at the screen pulse pounding in my ears. Strategic Director Emma Whitmore. My name in bold sitting beneath a corporate logo I hadn't touched in nearly a year. No phone call, no email, no contract, nothing. They had used my name without consent, without conversation, like a stock image they could download, slap on a deck, and call it credibility. Jessica's jaw clenched beside me. "They think they can steal your reputation like it's part of their rebrand," she said. Her voice was calm, but I could feel the fire under it. "We need to respond. Immediately." But I didn't answer. Not right away. I just sat there, hands cold, heart tight. Because I realized something even uglier than their legal overstep. They weren't inviting me back. They were packaging me. After building my name through grit, through strategy, through clarity, they were using that name like a sticker to cover up rot. And the worst part? It was working. The comments rolled in fast, LinkedIn posts and tweets full of cheers. "Smart move, Johnson. Whitmore's a powerhouse. Didn't she walk out last year? Looks like they're finally taking things seriously." But they weren't, because I wasn't there, and I wasn't going to let them control the ending to a story I'd bled for. The next morning, I submitted a cease and desist letter. Jessica had already looped in our attorney, who wasted no time. "This is false advertising, plain and simple," he said. "We can have it down by end of day, but that wasn't enough. Not for me. They hadn't just stolen my name. They'd tried to rewrite my narrative. So I scheduled a meeting with the Johnson Marketing Board, but not behind closed doors, public, on stage, at the Denver Innovation Summit, where I'd already been slated to speak. They wanted to use my reputation to save theirs. Then I'd show the world exactly who built that reputation and what it cost. I rewrote my keynote in one night. Every word, every beat, every silence was calculated. Jessica stayed up with me, combing through the speech, double-checking names and timelines. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about accuracy, about truth. The day arrived cold and sharp. Denver sky stretched wide over the convention center. Inside the ballroom, tech founders and startup leads buzzed over espresso shots and panel schedules. The event backdrop glowed behind the stage, legacy and innovation. Funny how those two words had haunted me for months. When the boy called my name, I stepped up in a deep navy sheath dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry. No script in hand, just one thing in my pocket, the worn brass office key. Its shape dug into my palm like a memory sharpened by time. I took the mic and looked out at the audience, some familiar, some watching with polite curiosity. "My name is Emma Whitmore." I began, my voice steady. "And for the record, I do not work for Johnson Marketing." A ripple moved through the crowd. A few heads turned. A phone screen lit up. "In fact," I continued, "I left that company nearly a year ago." Quietly. Without a press release. Without a farewell party. Without the dignity I had earned. I let the pause breathe. Yesterday, they announced me as their new strategic director. Without my approval. Without so much as a conversation. That, my friends, is not leadership. That's desperation. Murmurs now, audible. I reached into my pocket and held up the brass key. This was given to me when I was 29. I thought it meant trust. I thought it meant legacy. Turns out it was just a token. Until I became inconvenient. I stepped forward. Since leaving that company, I've built something new, something cleaner, something stronger. Not from revenge, but from clarity. Because legacy is not something you inherit. It's something you prove every single day. Applause started slow but building, real. I didn't smile. I didn't soak it in. I delivered my last line as the room leaned in. Your voice, your value is not a brand asset. And anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't deserve to lead. I stepped off stage to a standing ovation. Not because I gave a great speech, but because I had finally taken my name back. Later that night, Jessica and I returned to the office. We placed the official takedown letter beside the two brass keys in my drawer. One earned, one polished, both real. But as I sat down ready to close the chapter, Jessica's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowed. "You're not going to believe this." She handed me her phone. It was a legal notice from Johnson's legal team. They were counter-claiming, accusing us of using insider knowledge to poach Harper Industries. And they were threatening federal action. My breath caught in my throat as I read the header, Johnson & Associates Legal Counsel, formal complaint of intellectual misappropriation. They were accusing me of stealing internal strategy to win Harper, claiming I'd breached confidentiality, exploited proprietary systems, and orchestrated the client's departure with intent to undermine brand integrity and extract market advantage. I sat still, jaw tight, watching the words burn into my mind like ink across a contract I never signed. Jessica paced behind me, muttering in disbelief. "This is insane. You built those systems from scratch. They didn't even know what CRM segmentation meant until you drew it on the damn whiteboard." She was right. But this wasn't about facts. It was a smear strategy. They'd lost control of the narrative, lost the merger, lost Harper, and now they were trying to paint me as the villain. Not because they could win, but because they thought they could scare me into silence. I looked down at the keys in my drawer, one dull one polished, and I knew right then I wasn't backing down. I called my attorney the next morning. Nora Patel, sharp, methodical, zero tolerance for games. She'd worked corporate litigation for 12 years and never lost a whistleblower case. When I explained the situation, she didn't even blink. "Let them come," she said. "If they want war, we'll bring receipts." Over the next 2 weeks, we gathered everything. Emails, timestamps, cloud backups of my Harper proposal dated months before I left Whitmore. Slack threads where I discussed pipeline improvements that would later become the foundation of Elevation's platform. The truth was layered and boring, but undeniable. And then Nora did something bold. She filed a countersuit, on our behalf, for unauthorized use of likeness, attempted reputational fraud, and misuse of brand affiliation in a federal-level merger filing. But that wasn't the risky part. The risky part came in the deposition phase because Johnson's legal team tried to push for arbitration, but we refused. We wanted it public, on the record. I'll never forget the morning I walked into the deposition room. Neutral gray walls, a long walnut table, 2 pitchers of water, and 4 suits waiting at the other end like crows on a wire. My father wasn't there. Neither was my mother. But the man who was there, their senior legal counsel, looked at me like he hadn't expected me to show up with my shoulders back and a thumb drive full of receipts. They asked about client data, about Harper, about why the campaign I pitched was so similar to what I'd shown them years earlier. I leaned forward and said without blinking, because that wasn't theirs to begin with. It was mine, and I have the metadata to prove it. It was the first time I watched a corporate lawyer flinch at the word metadata. By the time the deposition ended, the mood had shifted. They knew they couldn't win in court, but it didn't stop them from trying to spin it in the media. That week, an article appeared in a second-tier business blog, unsigned, citing anonymous sources, accusing Elevation of poaching aggressive tactics and blurring ethical lines. It was transparent. It was calculated. But it landed just hard enough to make investors nervous. Jessica and I sat in our new office, the open floor, still half empty, watching Google alerts ping every 5 minutes. "They're playing dirty," she said, arms crossed. "Then we go clean," I replied. We released our own statement, measured factual, backed with documentation. Then we did something I'd been preparing for months but hadn't pulled the trigger on. We launched the Transparency Campaign, a content series featuring behind-the-scenes breakdowns of our Harper case study. What worked, what didn't. How we built it. We hosted live Q&As, released client testimonials, and gave a keynote titled, "Build It Yourself: What Happens When Your Voice Becomes a Brand." The response was immediate. Not just support, but trust. Real trust. The kind Whitmore hadn't earned in years. And then something I never expected happened. A letter arrived. Not through legal channels, not through press. Through Madison. Handwritten. 3 pages. No spin, no polish, just her handwriting and an envelope with no return address. I read it alone on a Sunday night, lights, low brass keys resting on the shelf behind me. She wrote about watching the smear unfold, about how she'd tried to push back internally, but the board had shut her out. She wrote about my speech at the Denver summit, about the way the room held its breath when I held up the key, about how for the first time she realized I wasn't just the strategist, I was the story. But the final paragraph stopped me cold. Dad didn't want to destroy you. He wanted to erase the version of you that reminded him of everything he failed to build himself. You didn't just threaten his legacy, Emma. You surpassed it, and some men never recover from that. I put the letter down and exhaled. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure, or so I thought, because 2 days later, Nora walked into my office, face pale, jaw tight. "You're going to want to sit down," she said, handing me a file. Inside wasn't another motion. It wasn't even from Johnson. It was a subpoena. A federal inquiry had just been launched into Johnson Marketing's internal financial records, and Harper Industries had submitted evidence that might implicate them in something much bigger, much older. And somehow, my name was still on the paperwork. I held the subpoena in both hands, fingertips pressed against the paper like it might change if I stared long enough. The letterhead was unmistakably Federal Department of Justice. Inside were dates, line items, codes, and then my name, threaded through vendor contracts, consulting references, and buried on page 4, an internal memo from Whitmore's finance lead referencing anticipated strategy credits tied to Whitmore Denver expansion. My jaw locked. They hadn't just used my name in a press release. They'd used me again on paper in numbers on record to fabricate legitimacy. The Harper merger was never just about image. It was about covering up something much older. And now the audit trail was drawing a red circle around me. Jessica sat across from me, arms crossed, foot bouncing. "Tell me this isn't real," she said, but she already knew it was. I turned to Nora, our attorney, who flipped through the file without blinking. "It's real," she said. "But here's what else is real. Harper submitted this memo voluntarily, and they included a cover letter stating that they believed you were fraudulently linked to financial decisions made after your departure." She looked up. "Emma, they're defending you. They're making you the whistleblower." I felt the breath leave my body, not in panic this time, but in something closer to stunned relief. I hadn't asked for any of this, but now I had a choice: stay quiet and let the federal probe play out quietly, or step forward, publicly, and help expose what was really happening behind Whitmore's glossy brand and polished emails. I chose the second. Over the next 3 weeks, I cooperated fully with investigators. We turned over all documentation timelines, internal backups, every file that proved not only my innocence, but a systemic pattern of retroactive attribution and legacy laundering. Nora stood beside me through every interview, calm, focused, bulletproof. Meanwhile, Jessica ran Elevation like a machine. Our client list grew even under the pressure. The transparency campaign we launched after the smear had evolved into a full-blown thought leadership platform. Our inbox became a confessional. Other women, other executives, quietly writing in to say, "That key, I have one too." Mine never opened anything either. One night, after a late meeting with the Federal Review Board, I came back to the office and found Madison waiting in the hallway. She looked exhausted, older somehow, but more herself than I'd ever seen. "I came to say thank you," she said. "And also I'm sorry." I nodded, not needing more. Not that night. She handed me something small. A flash drive. "This has the original accounting emails, the ones you need to close the loop." I took it, no questions. The next morning, we submitted the final batch of evidence. And 2 weeks later, I got the call the DOJ had formally cleared me of all involvement and listed me as a protected source in the official record. But that didn't stop the headlines. DOJ investigates Whitmore legacy fraud. Harper testifies Denver expansion was fabricated. Former CEO, daughter breaks silence. Requests came pouring in for interviews, podcast features, speaker panels. But I didn't say yes to any of them. Not yet. Instead, I wrote something else. A letter to the next woman who would walk into a room thinking her results would speak for her. The next woman who'd be asked to smile, more soften her feedback, or wait her turn. I wrote it plain, no jargon, no fluff, just a roadmap. A real one. Jessica printed it and framed the first page in the office entryway. Clients noticed. A few asked for copies. 1 month later, Elevation was booked out through Q3. Harper doubled their scope again. We expanded into Austin. And then just when it felt like the past had finally gone quiet, Jessica walked in holding a padded envelope. "This came for you," she said. "No return address." Inside, a folded piece of paper, and wrapped in tissue, a third brass key. But this one was different. Not mine, not Madison's. This one was engraved. Property of Elevation, not for inheritance. And under it, a handwritten note. Just 5 words. "Let's finish what they started." Story 2. My sibling knocked. My mother and wife assisted them in concealing it. They want me to raise the child and cover my brother's legal expenses 6 months later. Hi everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. The video subreddit will now begin. I never imagined that I'd be blogging here, but I need to vent. The three individuals who were meant to support me really caught me off guard. My own mother, my brother, and my wife. This is how it all transpired. For the past 5 years, I, a 28-year-old man, have been employed as a software developer. Worked my way up to senior developer at a tiny software startup. We create CRM platforms, payment systems, and corporate solutions. That sort of thing. Although it wasn't the most glamorous job in the world, I was able to purchase a respectable 2-bedroom home in a desirable area 2 years ago because to the money I made from it. Purchased it prior to marriage. Even if my firm isn't as well known as Google or Apple, we're nonetheless strong. $90K basic salary, with yearly incentives that often total between $15 and $20K perks for health that truly cover stuff. A 401K match is the type of steadiness that most men my age still long for. When I initially started, my 42-year-old supervisor, Chester, took me under his wing. He is an old-school programmer who went into management, yet continues to work with programming. He taught me more than simply recommended practices for coding. He taught me how to negotiate my pay and handle workplace politics. Helped me manage customer expectations without making unrealistic promises. And it earned me an additional $12,000 on my most recent promotion. Then, 3 years ago, at a friend's home party, my wife, now ex-wife Megan, a 26-year-old woman, entered my life. She was a stunning blonde nurse with a pediatric specialty who worked at the nearby hospital. Everyone could see the spark between us right away. One of those relationships where you feel like you've been friends for years. My attention was initially drawn to the way she lighted up while discussing her work. Not only superficial information, but the technical facets of pediatric treatment. Even for a techie like myself, she was able to make sense of complicated medical processes. Astute, committed, and passionate about her work. It was just what I wanted. Before I proposed, we dated for a year. We had a little wedding at her parents' church after she sobbed and said yes. Only about 50 individuals, close relatives and friends. The 2.1-carat diamond ring with a platinum band cost me 2 months' pay. To put things in perspective, my 24-year-old younger brother Ed has always been the star of the show despite being 4 years younger. More attractive, more sociable, and more adept at swaying our mother to grant him his wishes. In high school, he was a varsity baseball player. I was the youngster from the chess club who spent my leisure time creating websites. A classic case of mama's boy. I was the responsible, quiet one who put in a lot of effort, but was never quite up to mom's standards. Ed was unquestionably mom's favorite, but dad was always fair to us both. That relationship remained constant. At family get-togethers, the difference between us was almost laughable. Ed was 2 hours late for Thanksgiving 3 years ago. With a female he met the previous evening, but without the side dish he had promised. I had been there since the morning helping to prepare the turkey, and instead of being irritated, Mom worried over both of them. When Mom wasn't looking, Dad just poured me an additional glass of water and shook his head. Dad is a mechanical engineer by profession. Methodical and logical, it follows the rules. I learned how to change the oil in my first automobile from him, how to repair a dripping faucet. All that crap about the practical dad. He admired my coding work even if he never understood it. I had landed a good job. Mom quit early from her job as an elementary school teacher when Dad's engineering company took off. Had a special place in her heart for Ed, whom she referred to as her creative, sensitive soul. I immediately started coding after graduation, whereas Ed worked at a variety of occupations. After a few months of employment, he would become bored and leave. Had a tale about toxic management all the time. In the meantime, his credit card debts somehow ended up being an issue for his parents. Twice. I bailed him out of 2 small legal issues, one with trespassing at an ex-girlfriend's place, and another involving driving with an expired license. Cost me around $3,000, which he said he would reimburse as soon as circumstances improved. In the end, I assisted him in landing a sales position with my business. My supervisor, Chester, was apprehensive. The previous year, he had met Ed at our company's Christmas party and had not been pleased. However, I endorsed him. I promised to keep him in line. I thought Ed would have some stability there, and he had the charm for it. Besides, family protects family, right? Our company offered a base salary of $65,000 plus commission for the sales position. Not bad considering Ed's patchy record. I coached him on our products for 3 weekends. According to industry jargon, this was his opportunity to create something tangible. He said all the right things and appeared appreciative. I got one of those from Chester. You must be aware of what you're doing. When I introduced them, they look. Megan and I had a fairly smooth transition to married life. Although it wasn't suitable for a Hollywood film, our relationship was strong. We discussed forming a family. In a year or two, perhaps. I worked on the house on the weekends, building a deck in the backyard, and installing a new kitchen island. All that stuff for homeowners. The place looked like it was from one of those home design magazines, thanks to Megan's decorations. In that first year, I invested roughly $20,000 in home improvements. The master bathroom was updated with heated floors and a rainfall shower. And the living room was given new hardwood flooring. The backyard was landscaped. Every dollar I invested increased the property's value and provided us with a place we both cherished. It was a good first year. On Sunday morning, we had our usual pancakes, date nights on Wednesdays, sporadic weekend visits to her parents' lake home. We took a cooking class together and threw game nights for our friends. Couples activities are what you're expected to do. We appeared content. After a year or so, I was given a significant project at work that involved rebuilding a large hospital chain's payment system. The irony isn't lost on me now. I was working longer hours, often coming home after Megan was asleep. Weekend work became normal. The project was supposed to last 3 months, but stretched to 6. I started missing those Sunday pancakes, those Wednesday date nights. The project was a career maker successfully implementing a new payment system for a $2 billion company would put me on the fast track for a senior architect position. Bigger salary stock options, more control over which projects I worked on. I explained all this to Megan, and she seemed to understand. She even brought me dinner at the office a few times during those first weeks of overtime. During this time, Megan made a new friend at work. Alexis, this travel nurse from Seattle, who was doing a 6-month rotation at our hospital. Alexis was everything. Megan wasn't single carefree kind of wild. Suddenly, Megan was going out for girls' nights with Alexis and coming home with stories about clubs I didn't know existed in our city. I was too busy with my project to really notice how much things were changing. Things started feeling weird about 4 months before things imploded right around when my big project was wrapping up. The system was finally launched, and I was looking forward to getting back to normal life with Megan. But somewhere along the way, normal had shifted. Megan's schedule got unpredictable. She'd always been consistent with her hospital shifts, 3 12-hour days, then 4 days off. But suddenly, she was picking up extra shifts and going out with coworkers more often. When I asked, she'd say the hospital was short-staffed or that her friend Amber was going through a breakup and needed support. I checked our bank statements one night and noticed Megan had been withdrawing $200 to $300 in cash every week for the past 2 months. When I asked about it casually, she said something vague about preferring cash for small purchases, and girls' nights out made sense on the surface, but it was new behavior. I tried to reconnect, suggested we take a weekend trip to celebrate my project being done. She said she couldn't get the time off. I offered to cook her favorite dinner. She texted last minute saying Alexis needed her help with something. A rational person might have connected these dots sooner, but I was still operating on trust. 6 years of building enterprise systems had trained me to look for multiple data points before declaring a bug. I needed more evidence. Then there was the phone stuff. She'd be texting constantly with this little smile on her face, but the second I walked in the room, phone flipped over. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd say just Amber or work group chat. After I got Ed the sales job at my company, he started coming to office. Happy hours more. Megan would show up too, saying she wanted to support both of us. There was this one night at Bally's where I got stuck talking to a client who showed up unexpectedly. I was across the room for maybe 45 minutes when I finally broke free. I found Megan and Ed in this deep conversation in a corner booth, heads almost touching. They jumped a little when I walked up. Ed immediately launched into the story about a potential lead at the hospital where Megan worked, how they were discussing an in with the procurement department. Made sense on the surface. What didn't make sense was how Ed's hand lingered on Megan's arm a bit too long, or how Megan's cheeks were flushed in that way. I recognized from our early dating days, but again, my own brother, my own wife. I filed it away as an anomaly, not a pattern. Ed started showing up at our place unannounced. 2. He'd bring Megan these little gifts, her favorite coffee from that specialty shop downtown, fancy chocolates or candles she enjoyed. When I complimented him for being thoughtful, he'd say stuff, like simply watching out for my sister-in-law. I truly thought it was lovely at the time. Freaking ignorant at work. Ed was actually doing well in sales, hit 115% of his quota 3 months in a row. Started dressed better, seemed more focused. I was secretly happy that my aiding him had paid off. Coworkers would applaud me on clearing stuff out, and I'd get this misguided feeling of brotherly success. Then around 2 months after Megan started becoming sick in the mornings, I'd hear her in the bathroom at 6 a.m., the shower running to conceal the sounds. One morning, I woke up to check on her, holding her hair back as she spewed up. I mentioned maybe she was pregnant and she freaked out, like truly panicked. Said that the hospital was experiencing a gastrointestinal ailment. She made a doctor's appointment right away, but she didn't want me to accompany her. That there was no need for concern. I had been using my calendar to keep track of her cycle. After all, we were purportedly trying for a child. This was the first time she had ever been late by 2 weeks. However, I didn't ask her directly. I assumed she would let me know when she was prepared. Perhaps she was hesitant to share the news until she was certain. Around this time, I went out for drinks with my buddy Kevin, who works in hospital administration, not at Megan's hospital. I told him about Megan's enigmatic stomach ailment when he inquired about how things were doing. "Morning sickness, dude?" He winked as he spoke. He had this strange expression on his face when I told him Megan denied it. "Are you two still attempting?" I said, "Yes." He simply nodded and shifted the conversation. He texted me later that evening, "I don't mean to start a fight, but how is Ed doing at your business?" I responded that he was meeting his sales goals and performing well. Kevin never gave a reason for his question. At this point, Mom also began to behave strangely. When I was around, she would contact Megan directly rather than our house phone as normal. Megan would say things like, "Yes, I got that recipe," or "I'll check that sale" during these calls. However, it felt like the talks went on longer than necessary. Mom exclaimed, "Oh, Josh is home," as soon as I entered the room while they were on speaker. "Later we will discuss." Megan had always been liked by Mom, but they suddenly became close. They would go shopping with each other and share inside jokes that I was not aware of. Even a family heirloom jewelry that had been pledged to my future wife since I was a child was given to Megan by Mom. Mom responded, "Well, she's your wife now, isn't she?" when I expressed my amazement at this. Her tone seemed strange for some reason. One Thursday in April, everything went apart. Megan had a shift at the hospital, so I worked from home. When she arrived home, I had planned to surprise her with her favorite takeaway for supper. After feeling separated for weeks, I'm hoping to get back in touch. I received an email notification at lunchtime informing me that the furniture delivery I had been anticipating was set for tomorrow. I was unable to locate the initial confirmation in my email to respond to, so I had to confirm the time slot. In our home office, Megan and I shared a desktop computer, which I used for personal projects, and Megan for her nursing and continuing education. I was signed into my email, but I recalled that Megan occasionally arranged my emails on the computer. While I let emails to accumulate, she was a huge fan of Inbox Zero. I checked Megan's email to see whether she had sent it to a folder after thinking that perhaps she had seen it. The subject line of an email exchange between her and my mother caught my attention at that point. "Keep Josh in the dark." I felt sick to my stomach. For what seemed like an eternity, I sat there looking at that subject line. I had a voice in my brain telling me to shut down the browser and respect her privacy. But there was also a stronger voice asking me, "What the hell is this about?" It felt like I was getting repeatedly smacked in the face when I began reading the thread handshaking. My mom and Megan exchanged emails 3 months ago on how to conceal Megan's romance with Ed. The initial communications were ambiguous. Mom asked Megan whether she was certain about this course of action and cautioned her to use greater caution around Josh, but they soon got to the point. In reality, Mom was giving her guidance on how to hide it, when to report for hospital shifts, what justifications to make, and even how to meet at her house when Dad was away playing golf. You have at least 4 hours, because Frank always plays 18 holes on Thursdays. I read one email. To help Megan and Ed scheme behind my back, Mom had made a comprehensive itinerary of when Dad would be out of the home. The bomb came next. The pregnancy was the subject of the most recent correspondence. They weren't sure if it was Ed's or mine, but Megan's doctor verified that she was 2 months pregnant. We were in the same time frame. After I indicated that the morning sickness may be pregnancy, Megan sent me a panicked email. My wife was being told to pass it off as mine by my own mother. In any case, Josh wouldn't be harmed by what he doesn't know, and he would be a better father nevertheless. It was like reading a conspiracy thriller during the entire chat. They had backup plans, time-stamped specific alibis, and even a shared calendar where they kept track of my work schedule and scheduled our meetings appropriately. What irritated me was how methodical everything was. This was more than a careless error. The 3 individuals who were meant to love me the most were involved in a planned, ongoing lie. I was physically ill. I must have spent hours reading these emails while seated at the computer. It was more terrible than the last one. I was looking for anything that would explain that this was all a sick joke, a mistake, or something else entirely. No, it was brutally obvious. I saved all of the screenshots I captured on a flash drive. I then placed the most damning ones in a folder after printing them out. I gave Chester a call. I was unable to think clearly. Someone level-headed was needed. A lawyer is necessary. Don't confront them just yet, he urged. Chester had a good lawyer. It had been a difficult second divorce for him. I was in my living room when he made the call. Put it on. Speaker. Sarah Jacobson, divorce attorney. Since we lived in a fault state and I had concrete evidence of adultery, Sarah thought I was in a strong position. The fact that I had bought the house before marriage meant it wouldn't be considered marital property. Same with most of my assets and money. She encouraged me to safeguard my funds quickly, so Chester drove me to the bank. I moved most of our joint funds into a separate account, leaving enough in the joint account to avoid claims of financial abandonment. I left exactly $5,000 in our joint account, enough to show I wasn't trying to financially strand her, but not enough to fund a new life with my brother. The rest, about $38,000, went into an individual account under just my name. I also called my investment firm and verified that my premarital assets, about $115,000 in various funds, were properly documented as separate property. By the time Megan arrived home that night, I had already set things in action. Sarah was drafting divorce papers. Chester had helped me regain some composure. I didn't confront Megan that night. I was still in shock, and I needed to think carefully. "How was your shift?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady. "Exhausting," she remarked, outlining some imaginary emergency department situation. I watched her lie to my face, thinking of the emails where she reported seeing Ed at my mother's place that exact day. The toughest part was pretending everything was normal when my entire life was exploding. She inquired why Chester's vehicle had been in our driveway earlier. Apparently, the neighbors had mentioned it. I stated we'd been considering a work project, another falsehood to add to the pile over the following several days. I behaved normal while setting things in action. I'd go to work, make small chat with Megan in the evenings, even watched our normal Thursday night program together, all while dying within. I grabbed all my crucial documents and placed them to a safety deposit box. I froze our shared credit cards. I even put mini cameras in our communal spaces, totally legal as it was my house. Chester helped me set them up while Megan was at work, just in case they try to remove or damage anything he suggested. Kevin from hospital administration texted to check in. Turns out he'd seen Megan and Ed together at a restaurant weeks earlier, appearing more intimate than in-laws should. He'd been trying to find a way to inform me. I thanked him for trying, told him I found it out on my own. My strategy started formulating on Sunday night. Megan was in the shower when a text notice flashed up on her iPad on the coffee table from Ed stating he couldn't wait to see her tomorrow at Mom's. The treachery was happening virtually every day, directly under my nose. That's when I settled on the supper plan. I contacted my dad Monday morning and asked if he might have a family dinner at our house that weekend. I told him I had some excellent news to give. "Are you sure you want to host your mom and I can accomplish it?" He extended an offer. "No, I insist. At our house, please," I said as I considered how ideal it would be to face them all on my land. I instructed Megan to get ready for a nice supper and invited Ed to join my parents. Despite her nervousness, she consented. When I told her Ed was coming, I could feel the stress in her shoulders. That day, she texted nonstop, most likely, planning stories with his mother and him. I had 2 additional meetings with Sarah in the days before the dinner. She prepared drafts of the divorce petition. Sarah gave an update over the phone on Thursday. On Friday morning, the divorce documents would be prepared. The manila envelope was burning a hole in my bag all afternoon when I picked them up during my lunch break. I took the afternoon off work on the day of the dinner to get everything ready. Food was ordered from this charming downtown Italian restaurant. I couldn't have been cooking. My dad received a bundle of emails in a bigger envelope and divorce papers in a manila envelope. The dining room's camera was recording. In case things became unmanageable, later, I wanted evidence. I was also prepared with another surprise. I got a cashier's check for $10,000 made out to my dad after cashing out some stock options. I was aware that Ed had lately received a loan from my parents to settle his credit card debt. I reasoned that before the family broke apart, Dad should receive his money back. At 6:30 p.m., my parents were the first to arrive. Mom inquired where Megan was right away after giving me this strange, tight embrace. "She's preparing herself upstairs." My voice was fairly steady as I spoke. Ed arrived last at 6:45. I wanted to smack him right away because of his arrogant smirk. As if we were still friends, he slapped my back and gave me one of those bro embraces. It took all of my self-control not to respond. I got Megan this blue outfit for our anniversary, and she walked downstairs wearing it. We all took a seat for supper. I maintained my composure while chit-chatting about work, the weather, and my father's golf game. Mom continued to look anxiously between Ed and Megan. Megan moved her food about her plate, hardly touching anything. Dad raised his glass after the main meal, "So tell us about the happy news you wanted to share." Grinning, I took out the manila envelope from beneath the table. "I do have anything to share, actually," I remarked, passing the envelope to Megan across the table. "The documents are divorce paperwork." The room fell quiet. Megan's cheeks turned pale. "What are you discussing?" Without opening the envelope, she muttered, "Megan, I am fully aware of you, Ed, and the baby. It may be his. About your mother helping you conceal everything." Despite my inward rage, I maintained a steady tone of speech. Mom gave a sharp gasp. "You have no right to accuse them of this. Megan would never do that." I took out the second envelope and gave it to my dad, interrupting her. Mom and Megan exchanged emails about the affair and how to keep it a secret from me. Lasted for a minimum of 3 months. Dad began to read, his hands shaking. He lost the color in his face. Ed abruptly knocked his chair over and sprang to his feet. "It was not your place to read her correspondence," he yelled, as if it were the true offense committed here. I believe I had every reason to suspect my wife of being unfaithful to my brother and perhaps carrying his child, I said, maintaining a level voice. "Megan, how long were you going to keep that a secret? Did you simply pretend it was mine?" Megan started crying. "It isn't what you believe," she cried. "I cherish you. It was an error. While my mother covered for you, I made a 3-month error with my brother." There was no comedy in my laughter. "You're pregnant now, too." Dad was reading the papers when Mom reached for them, but he kept them out of her reach. "What is this, Catherine?" His voice was dangerously quiet as he asked, "Did you assist them in concealing this from Josh?" Fake shock had turned to terror on my mother's face. "You assured me, Megan, that it was Josh's." Throwing Megan under the bus to rescue herself, she remarked abruptly. Looking up from the emails, Dad did so. He had a stone-hard face. "Catherine, were you aware of this? Did you assist them in keeping this a secret from our son?" Quiet, yet very serious, was his voice. In an attempt to play victim, Mom began to cry. All I wanted to do was keep the family safe. Ed was wrong, but it wouldn't assist anyone if the family was split apart. In fact, Ed, the arrogant jerk, sneered. "It's not that big of a deal, please. I bonded with Megan. It occurs." In any case, Josh is always at work, seldom gives her any attention. Something broke inside of me. I got up, went around the table, and gave him a straight punch to the nose. A nice snap sounded, and blood began streaming down his face instantly. He knocked over a side table as he staggered back. Mom ran to Ed and yelled, "Josh, what's wrong with you?" Then Dad got up, and he looked more irate than I had ever seen him. "Catherine, enough. Our son recently discovered the worst kind of betrayal from his brother and wife. You're also concerned about Ed's nose." He gestured to Ed. "Now leave this house." Ed glared at us all while holding his bleeding nose. "It's not over yet. This is something you will regret." Before hurriedly leaving via the front door, he spit. Dad grabbed her arm as Mom attempted to follow him. "You remain here. We need to talk about your part in all of this." At the table, Megan was still in tears. "Please, Josh. This is something we can resolve. I'm so sorry. I made a grave error." I felt nothing but icy disdain as I turned to face her. "A paternity test is what I want. I need to know whether this baby is mine if you plan to keep it. In any case, we're finished." I gave my dad the cashier's check. "This is to reimburse Ed for the recent loan." I reasoned that before anything goes wrong, you ought to get your money back. Dad gave the check a mournful glance before turning back to face me. "I didn't know any of this was going on, son." In a desperate attempt to defend herself, Mom said that she only wanted to keep Ed safe, and that while she knew it was wrong, she believed it would only be a phase and that she didn't want to hurt me. It didn't sit well with Dad. "Get your coat," he said. After my parents departed, they were departing. It seemed like hours passed while Megan and I sat in quiet. At last, she said something. "Now what, right now? You now gather your belongings and depart. I own the house. It is not a part of the community. You have till tomorrow to decide your course of action. It won't be here, though." After giving a hesitant nod, she headed upstairs to pack. The ruins of what I believed to be my life were all around me as I sat at the dining table, having an oddly peaceful feeling. I had made it through the worst that had transpired. From now on, everything will be rebuilt. The weeks that followed were a haze of paperwork and legal sessions. In order to stay with a buddy, Megan moved out. Interestingly enough, not with Ed. The day following the supper, I had replaced the locks. As soon as it was safe to do so, the paternity test was planned. Megan nodded without protest. I believe she had a secret wish that the child would be mine. I'm thinking that may make a difference. Ed had the audacity to call the police and report the punch, and 2 weeks after the meal, I was issued with a minor assault complaint. Sarah, my lawyer, wasn't too worried. First offense, emotional provocation, and lack of a weapon. Although it isn't a defense in and of itself, it could be important for punishment. She made it apparent that the attack would not be disregarded by the court. However, context could be on my side. Our hearing was 3 months later. Playing the victim like an expert, Ed arrived with his arm around Mom. Sarah accompanied me and Chester, and 2 other character witnesses from my job attested to my track record of professionalism and self-control. The court heard testimony detailing the events that preceded the incident, assessed the occurrence, and accepted some background information about the affair not as justification, but as background. The court ultimately convicted me guilty of simple assault and fined me $500, stating that the crime was a one-time reaction to a very personal betrayal. The judge wasn't holding anything when she said, "I let emotions get in the way of better judgment," but she also hinted that Ed was lucky that things hadn't become worse. Mom seemed ashamed. Ed scowled as if he anticipated a round of applause. I thought the $500 was well spent. The day the assault charges were filed, Dad gave me a call. He was enraged. At Ed, not at me. He informed me that he had already started the process of completely removing Ed from his will. Mom reportedly had a total breakdown when she learned vowing to leave Dad if he carried out the plan. She may leave, I informed her. but she should know that if she picked Ed above our family, I would make sure she received nothing. Dad said that to me. Get her to stop talking quickly. My dad's financial situation is serious. Smart investments, 30 years at his engineering company, assets in real estate. It makes sense that when Dad threatened to cut Ed out, Mom freaked out. This whole event exposed Mom's true nature. Ed had been brought up to believe he was infallible by her, and now she had to deal with the fallout from producing such a conceited jerk. At least she would quit publicly defending Ed, according to Dad, who stated she was still wailing and moping about her family's disintegration. A week after the supper, Dad stopped by the house. He assisted me with repainting the living room and master bedroom by bringing his tools, removing any trace of Megan's interior design decisions. "You're managing this better than I would have at your age," he added, placing his hand on my shoulder after we completed working without any conversation. "You have my admiration." He had no idea how much that meant. After taking a week off, I returned to work. Chester had informed the staff that I needed space since I was juggling family matters. He had moved my desk to a different floor from Ed's section by the time I got back. Well done. Chester also placed Ed on a performance improvement plan, citing ethical issues in his file, as I later learned. Although it isn't illegal to sleep with your brother's wife, Chester managed to make Ed's job more difficult without going against the law. My dad felt entitled to know what his daughter had done, so he told Megan's devout parents everything. It devastated them. Her father apologized over the phone, stating they had brought her up better than this. They informed Megan that unless she returned to God, she would not be allowed in their house. I couldn't blame them for being dissatisfied, but it was very harsh. Eventually, Ed and Megan rented an apartment together, but they didn't seem very happy based on what I've heard. Their sole guest was Mom, who crept over when she assumed Dad wouldn't be looking. All three of them were removed from my life, banned their emails, changed my phone completely, and so forth. The only family member I still communicate with is my dad. The results of the paternity test were returned. It wasn't my baby. It was a relief in a sense, a fresh start with no biological bonds to uphold. After then, the divorce process proceeded without incident. The paternity test confirmed that it wasn't my child, and the adultery was verified. Megan received very little since we lived in a phony state. I retained the majority of our assets, including the property and my retirement savings. She didn't resist at all. I believe she was aware that she had no justification. After hearing the whole tale, our buddies largely agreed with me. Some made an effort to remain impartial, stating that every story has two sides, but they soon vanished. My true buddy took charge, asked me to join them for dinner, kept in touch, and prevented me from isolating myself. I immersed myself into a new project, redesigning the claims processing system for a large insurance business. The 70-hour work weeks let me forget about everything. Chester began preparing me for the role of technical director. Quicker progress than I had anticipated, but I was prepared. In addition, I shed the 15 pounds I had put on during my marriage by joining a gym and hiring a trainer who kicked my ass 3 times a week. Gained muscle, resumed running, completed a half marathon 6 months following the separation. For a long time, dating was the last thing on my mind. I wasn't prepared when friends tried to set me up. Problems with trust don't go away quickly. I was doing well 6 months after everything happened. The divorce was completed. In addition to getting a promotion at work, the assault charges were resolved with a minor fine. At last, the house felt like mine once more. I completely demolished the master bathroom after renovating and getting rid of anything that made me think of Megan. New fixtures and tile. Everything is new. Created a home gym out of the guest bedroom. In the living area, a unique entertainment unit was constructed. The home turned into a project that occupied my hands and helped me concentrate. When I finished, it didn't resemble the apartment where Megan and I had shared a residence. My financial situation was better than it had ever been. Along with a $20,000 pay increase, the promotion included stock options. In addition to opening a separate investment account and making the most of my 401k contributions, I also started researching rental properties as possible sources of income. I was in a better financial situation than most men my age at the age of 28, especially since I didn't have a wife to deplete my finances. Then, unexpectedly, my mother texted me to beg to meet in a downtown diner, stated that she needed to speak with me face to face and that it was crucial. I consented to see her when I was having lunch. To be clear, I had just 30 minutes. Once I got to the diner, I regretted coming right away. Mom wasn't by herself. With a baby carrier on the booth seat, Megan sat next her looking worn out. I was about to leave when my mother saw me and gave me a frenzied wave. Without bothering to say hello, I strolled over and took a seat across from them. "What is this?" I questioned, staring at my mother. She was polite enough to appear uneasy. She said, "Your father doesn't know I'm here." "But I had to speak with you. Ed has been taken into custody." I took notice of that. For what reason was he arrested? He was apprehended stealing funds from the business. Last week, he also received a DUI. Mom's voice cracked as she said, "He might spend a lot of time in prison. I need your assistance to save him." I simply gaped at her in shock. "Do you want me to save the day? The brother who had an affair with my wife, caused her to become pregnant, and then accused me of assault? Are you crazy?" Upon closer inspection, I noticed that Mom's manicure was cracked and her fancy purse was worn and scratched. Her expenditures must have been stopped by her father. "Well done." Then, in a little voice, Megan said, she pointed to the infant and added, "Ed left us shortly after Lily was born." "I'm not ready to be a father," he added. He was drinking excessively. Occasionally, when he was upset, he would shove me. I didn't feel happy that their relationship had fallen apart. Not sympathy for her predicament. Nothing at all. He struck her. Mom said something like that, "Josh, that would somehow make me care." She is presently alone herself with the infant. No work, no help. I gave Megan a glance. "And from me, what do you want?" She broke down in tears. I'm at a loss on what to do. My parents refused to speak to me. With a newborn, I can't work. Our bank account was completely depleted by Ed prior to his imprisonment. I hoped you would be able to assist. Until I'm able to stand again, I took a step back and stared at these two ladies who had deceived me and were now pleading with me for assistance, because the man they had picked over me turned out to be the complete jerk I had always suspected. Mom gave a nod. "Family is helpful." "Family, Josh." It nearly made me chuckle. When you were assisting them in concealing their affair from me, where was that sense of family loyalty when you persuaded Megan to attempt to claim this child as her own? Mom remarked, "I made a mistake. I'm crying. I believed I was keeping everyone safe. No, your favorite was being protected." "Flatly," I replied, "and you continue to pick him now, despite all that he has done." Mom lowered her voice and leaned forward. "Your dad is acting irrationally. All of our accounts are frozen by him. Without his consent, I am unable to access any funds. He is discussing divorce, unless I sever all contact with Ed." "I think that makes sense. Dad is finally advocating for himself," I replied. I pulled out my wallet and got to my feet. I placed a women's shelter card on the table. "Megan, you can get help here." "I won't." "As for Ed, I don't care if he rots in prison." I glanced at my mother. "Never get in touch with me again. Tell Dad that I'm missing him and that he may contact me whenever he wants." I got out of my automobile without turning around. I sat there for a while, hoping to sense anything. Anger, validation, and maybe even sympathy. However, they were no longer my issue. I was doing well without them having rebuilt my life from the ashes they had left behind. Dad gave me a call that evening. He told me he had no intention of aiding Ed, and that he had discovered Mom's whereabouts and the reason behind his apology for her actions. We spent about an hour discussing the new woman I'd been seeing the house and work. Typical father-son fare. A few months later, I learned from acquaintances that Ed had accepted an 18-month plea agreement for embezzlement. After moving back to her hometown, Megan reportedly made amends with her parents, who were now assisting with the kid. In my case, I was promoted to director at work, where I now manage a group of 15 developers. The rental property I purchased is already bringing in a profit. Next summer, I intend to go hiking in Yellowstone for 2 weeks. I've always wanted to do this, but have never had the time. Even if life isn't ideal, I'm still going forward, and I've realized that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. On certain days, that suffices.